Welcome to the Daily Boogie.
To our next segment, which is called
The Weekly Stelter.
I think we should take a little trip. Take a trip with me. With that man right there. Let's go on a trip to President Trump's Fantasyland.
Fantasyland.
Everything he says, it's rosy.
President Trump's Fantasyland, I'm sure, also includes Russian sex seductresses, doesn't it? Doesn't it, Brian? Brian's my boy. Let's go.
Everything he says, it's rosy. Everything's up. Everything's getting better, he says.
Everything's
Even
up.
as Robert Mueller's probe is looking worse and worse for his White House. So before I show you what Trump is saying, I want to show you a brand new CNN poll out this morning. It's new approval ratings data showing
CNN
President
poll.
Trump at 35%. This matches his record low in CNN's polling, and he remains at a historically low level for a president at this point in his presidency.
At reliable sources, CNN poll. Trump approval slides from 40 to 35, matching the lowest point of his presidency. It seems not everything is up, if you know what I mean, Brian.
35%. I want to show you that data first before I show you the Fantasyland version. This is the spin that's out there, courtesy of Judge Jeanine Pirro on Fox News. Now, here's the thing. President Trump called into Pirro's show last night, and she went over the top in her praise of him. Watch.
Let's talk about being over the top, Brian.
There's a poll that puts you at 50%. At CPAC, you're at 93% approval rating. You did all this in 1 year with the economy.
Okay, did you see what you put on screen there? That CPAC poll. That was a straw poll taken of the attendees of the annual conservative conference.
Yes, but Brian, it was only weeks ago that you were telling us that half of the Republicans hate Donald Trump too, mate. Did you see that poll? It was the attendees from CPAC. Of course they all love Donald Trump. 2 weeks ago, of course half of the Republicans hate Donald Trump. He's destroying their party. So this is why I love Brian Stelter. Brian Stelter doesn't allow recent history to get in the way of his work that he takes very seriously. Very seriously indeed. And we will be tracking Brian Stelter every single week right here.
Now, obviously, most of the people there are very supportive of President Trump.
Obviously.
That's not a surprise. That's like asking people at a Yankees game how much they love the Yankees, okay? Even better, okay, it would be asking about the Eagles, given that the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Now, President Trump calls into Pirro's show. He gets all this positive reinforcement.
Yes.
He gets told how his approval ratings are soaring.
Yes.
When in fact, let's put that CNN data back up on screen, he's at 35%.
When in fact, let's put our CNN data back on the screen. He's only at 35%. That's a fact, ladies and gentlemen. 35% approval rating according to our CNN data.
Now you'll notice Pirro mentioned some other poll, 50%.
Some other poll.
That's a Rasmussen poll that actually is not strong enough. It's not the kind of poll that outlets like CNN even cite.
Ah! I want you to hear that again. Now, we have our poll here at CNN. Our CNN data says 35%. Judge Jeanine Pirro cited the Rasmussen poll. Rasmussen isn't even good enough for us to cite. CNN, ladies and gentlemen. The authority in polling.
Pirro mentioned some other poll, 50%.
Some other poll.
That's a Rasmussen poll that actually is not strong enough. It's not the kind of poll that outlets like CNN even cite.
It's not strong enough for us to cite here at CNN. So we don't mention the Rasmussen poll. We've got our own polls here at CNN, our own data, which is solid. It is solid. You can take it to the bank, ladies and gentlemen.
Because it doesn't meet our standards.
Ah,
it doesn't even call
our-
people on cell phones. It only calls landlines.
It doesn't meet our standards here at CNN. That's some other poll doesn't meet our standards. What's the standard? It's too approval. It's too much approving. There's too much approving going on Trump in those other polls. Here at CNN, we slap a 35% tag on his forehead. That's how much we approve. If you're at 36, you don't meet our criteria. Just one of those other polls that you've heard so much about. Carry on, Brian.
Anyway, I think this is an example of Trump's fantasy land. He's willing to give an interview to one of his friends who tells him how great he is, where the real data tells a story that's much worse, much more troubling for his White House.
Yes, see, don't you just love it? Donald Trump's fantasy land, because some other poll has him at 50%. Here at CNN, we don't do fantasy land. We take our own poll, which we have now decided is the only relevant one. All those other polls need to be discarded. Here at CNN, we take our only relevant poll, and it paints the White House under a cloud of mystery and innuendo and dark clouds and sun setting and demons coming out. Ghouls in the White House, 35%. There's never been a president that's been more hated than this one. Our data paints a very, very, very disturbing picture of the president indeed.
We've seen this over and over again recently. The president says one thing in his fantasy land when the facts show otherwise. This weekend, he's saying that the Democratic memo that's...
The facts. It's too much. This is what you call Brian Stelter. This is AR Brian. This is rapid-fire assault rifle style Brian Stelter. Don't worry about the other polls. We have the real data. Donald Trump's fantasy land. Our poll says 35%. Mowing down the audience with facts. Brian Stelter. And it's a quick reload. Like, you don't even get a chance to breathe. He's like snapping those mags in. Bang, bang, bang. Real data, bang. Real news, bang. Other polls, bang. Fantasyland, bang. I mean, he's an animal. He's a machine. He's a beast. Beast Stelter. Helter Stelter.
Supposed to rebut the Nunes memo. He says the memo is nothing, when in fact, the Democratic memo made a lot of news. And now, it seems...
Notice how he doesn't tell you what news it made, because most of the news was like, hang on, this Democrat memo, the Adam Schiff memo, the Schiff hole memo, the Schiff house memo, it actually backs up a lot of what the other one said. Have you realized that the Schiff house memo hasn't really been talked about a lot, maybe for a day, and then we all kind of moved on? Have you noticed that? There's a reason. There's a reason. Brian knows it. He knows it. In fact, Mr. President, the Democrat memo made news. And moving on. NetDrag says, with extra Botox emphasis. Yes. Yes. We can talk about the memo just for a second if you want to. Let me riff with you for a minute. What I understood from the memo, the Democrat memo, was, one, the dossier was in fact used as an integral reason for getting the Pfizer warrant. One, they told us that wasn't the case. That was false. It was. And they admitted to it in their own memo. And two, they also admitted that they didn't tell the Pfizer court, the judges, where they sourced the memo from and who paid for the intelligence, which was also spoken about in the New Year's memo. So, oh yes, it made news. Brian's right. It did make news for about a day before everyone realised, whoa, hang on, we can't keep talking about this. Someone might find something out. And we don't do that on CNN. We request that governments don't release information, don't release memos until they're released, and then we demand that they release more memos. That's how we roll. Right, Brian?
President Trump was watching the coverage of this memo on Fox on Saturday. You could tell because he was basically live tweeting Fox News. But even when Fox News told him the truth, even when Fox got it right, President Trump got it wrong.
Oh.
I want to show you this because it's a really stark example of the president misquoting what he's hearing.
Wins Alive, thanks
Here's
for joining us.
something the
Wins
president
Alive
tweeted.
says,
Let's put
yeah,
his
just a minor technicality. Exactly.
tweet on screen about Schiff. He says Congressman Schiff omitted and distorted key facts. You can see there's quote marks with attribution to Fox News. Now, obviously, then Trump goes on to attack Schiff. But the point is, he's quoting Fox News saying that Schiff was distorting key facts.
I love this. I love this angle that, see, Stelter often takes this angle. I've been watching Brian Stelter for a few years now because I find him intriguing. He's like, to me, he's like Pandora's box of journalism. Like, if only I could unlock Brian Stelter's mind, I would have the keys to dominate the media landscape as we know it. Without a doubt. If only I could get into that very bulbous, strong, perhaps steel-plated head, I could find the secret, ladies and gentlemen, for disseminating information for the masses. No luck as such, but I keep on trying. I endeavour to find that key, that secret. So, Stelter for quite some time has been saying that Donald Trump merely repeats what he sees on Fox News, which I find interesting because he's the president. Brian, he already knows. He already knows who has what memo and who did what. He already knows who spoke to whom. He knows how things got paid for. He knows who did what. He's the bloody president, mate. That's the privilege of being the president. You get to learn all the secrets. You don't have to wait for Fox News to say something. You already know. When you're the president, you already know the truth. That's the privilege of being the president. Kimmy says, never give up on your dream, Boogie. But that's the reality. You get briefings, you get intelligence reports, and you know the stories. You know a lot more than the media knows. See, because most people understand when Donald Trump endorses something that's said on Fox News, he's doing it because he already knows. And he'll pick that one line or that one comment and say, yep, that's right, and he tweets it out. But Brian thinks that he's just repeating what it says on Fox News because it's all lies and they're giving him pats on the back and saying he's doing a good job. No, Brian. It's not the case at all. He already knows. He's sending it out because someone else is saying it. If he says it, it's a scandal. If someone else in the media happens to say something along those lines, then all he has to do is retweet it. Do you see? You're behind the 8 ball, Brian. You're behind the 8 ball. And there was a question just there from, I forget who it was from, about Jared Kushner. I was never a big fan of Jared Kushner. I thought he was compromised from the beginning. He tried to borrow money from certain people to pay for property and stuff, which in of itself isn't a crime. And I don't think it's a big deal, but it's just an unnecessary, it's really just an unnecessary additive. Like, you don't need that. You don't need that shit swirling around you. So if I was on Trump's inner circle, which I never will be, but if I was, I would say, okay, you need to just start strategically, moving Kushner out. You don't have to make a big announcement and say he's gone because that will just whip people up. But what you need to do over a period of maybe 2 or 3 months is just slowly de-escalate Kushner's influence and move him to the periphery, and then, maybe he can end up in some kind of, maybe a think tank role or something if he really wants it, but I doubt he does. He can just go back to private life. I don't think it's a big issue, but it's an unnecessary issue. He probably hasn't done anything criminal, but, it's just not something that the White House needs right now. Yeah, not in the Oval Office, exactly. Just don't need that shit hanging around, so that's all I'd say about Kushner.
Facts.
Let's carry on with
Where
Brian.
did he get that from? I wondered, where
did
was
he
he
get
getting
it
that
from?
from? So I looked it up. Here is the soundbite from Fox News where he got it.
Congressman Schiff, he argues the Republican memo omitted and distorted key facts.
Okay, did you see what just happened there?
Yeah, I saw what happened there. You literally played a clip for like 3 seconds of one half of one sentence, and you think, like, look how happy he is. It's giddy. He's giddy. Did you see what happened there? Yes. You played one half of one sentence and then took it off the screen, and you think that's going to back up everything that you're saying. Brian, if I take 10 minutes of what you say and then quote one half of one sentence, I could make you anything. I could literally make you anything. I mean, look at you right now. Here's a quote right now. Ooh, he's happy, he's giddy. I can't believe I nailed it, he says. See what we're doing here? See what we're doing here?
Omitted and distorted key facts.
Okay, did you see what just happened there? This is what is kind of remarkable. The Fox News anchor correctly quoted Adam Schiff saying that the Republican memo distorted key facts. So you have Schiff, a Democrat, criticizing the Republican memo.
We've got a little
President
bit of a delay
Trump
here, guys.
Took 5 words out of the
work with me. A little bit of a delay.
Congressman Schiff, he argues the Republican memo omitted and distorted key facts.
I could make
Okay,
him
did you
smart.
see what just happened there? This is what is kind of remarkable. The Fox News anchor correctly quoted Adam Schiff saying that the Republican memo distorted key facts. So you have Schiff, a Democrat, criticizing the Republican memo. President Trump took 5 words out of the quote, turned the quote around.
Oh! Brian. See, Brian's an absolute genius. He's literally now. I just can't even. He's now accusing. He's now accusing the president of taking 5 words out of a quote and then spinning it around to present it to back himself up. Let's play it one more time.
Where he got it.
Congressman Schiff, he argues the Republican memo omitted and distorted key facts.
Okay, did you see what just happened there? This is what is kind of remarkable. The Fox News anchor correctly quoted Adam Schiff saying that the Republican memo distorted key facts. So you have Schiff, a Democrat, criticizing the Republican memo. President Trump took 5 words out of the quote, turned the quote around, made it about Schiff. If I did that in English class,
You just did it now. You just did it now, Brian. You just did it. Why the hell is he talking about English class? What's English class got to do with it? You just did it on national TV. One more time. One more time for the unironic, the gloriously unironic Brian Stelter.
Congressman Schiff, he argues the Republican memo omitted and distorted key facts.
Cut her off.
Okay, did you see what just happened there? This is what is kind of remarkable. The Fox News anchor correctly quoted Adam Schiff saying that the Republican memo distorted key facts. So you have Schiff, a Democrat, criticizing the Republican memo. President Trump took 5 words out of the quote, turned the quote around, made it about Schiff. If I did that in English class, I would be given an F. I would flunk the assignment.
Yes.
But this is what President Trump does all the time. He takes something that he wants to believe and he says that it happened. This is what I mean
Fantasyland.
by a Fantasyland.
Fantasyland.
And we've also been seeing this in the wake of the mass shooting in Florida.
The
it was remarkable to see the president leading these
get to the shooting
listening
after
sessions
this.
at the White House. But now, when he's at CPAC, when he's calling into Piro's show, he's promoting this idea of arming more and more teachers. Let's take a look at how he framed this discussion at CPAC.
The teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
This ridiculous rhetoric has to stop. This is part of Trump's Fantasyland. First of all, the national debate about this should be about stopping all shootings, not just school shootings. It shouldn't just be about teachers and students.
Yes. The national debate should be about something that is literally impossible to do. We should start, you know what? Why don't we also come from the debate of, say, the economy by saying there should be no poor people who spend money on alcohol and who gamble. We should eliminate that all completely. So the absolute best way to do that is let's make sure nobody has any money to spend. Let's ban everything. We should be coming to the gun debate with the aim of having 0 shootings whatsoever. 1, it's very realistic, but 2, it also proves that we care. We care. We want to have 0 shootings, not more shootings. Oh, yes. Yes. 0 shootings is obviously very, very plausible. Why don't we throw everybody in prison? Let's throw everybody in prison so nobody shoots anyone. Oh, hang on. Hang on. People die in prison all the time. They get stabbed with screwdrivers and stuff. No, that won't work. That won't work. Maybe if we cryogenically freeze everybody, and then the last guy to be frozen can put himself into the vat and freeze himself, like with maybe a string attached to the button or something, I don't know. If we cryogenically freeze everybody for the rest of eternity, then, ladies and gentlemen, there'll be no more shootings. It's very possible. Who knows? Let's get back to Donald Trump's Fantasyland, Brian. Brian, let's discuss Fantasyland. We should be talking about having 0 shootings. Oh, okay. Donald Trump's Fantasyland, says Brian Stelter. 0 shootings, Brian.
This ridiculous rhetoric has to stop. This is part of Trump's Fantasyland. First of all, the national debate about this should be about stopping all shootings.
Call someone else, say that someone else is living in a fantasy land for suggesting, measures which may or may not deter future shooters at schools. That's the debate you can have. Will this deter future people? Is it plausible? Will it be more negative than positive? We can have these debates. But if the other side of the debate is saying, no, we should be stopping all shootings, then I'm sorry, Brian, you're the one living in Fantasyland. You're the one that's being unreasonable. You don't have to think that, arming teachers is a good idea. That's fine. That's fine. You can debate that. But if you think the debate should be, how do we stop all shootings forever now into the future for as long as we shall live, then I'm afraid you're the one that's being unrealistic. You're the one living in a Fantasyland. They've even got the audacity. They've even got the solid audacity to stick underneath Brian Stelter reliable sources and President Trump's Fantasyland as he's telling you this garbage. It's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Not just school shootings. This shouldn't just be about teachers and students.
Oh, it should be everyone.
Second, this is Fantasyland thinking. Let's take the Las Vegas massacre. There were many officers, both at the concert and inside the Mandalay Bay Hotel, and yet 58 people still died. We've got to provide the proper context for these ridiculous quotes that are out there. Even if President Trump prefers to live in a Fantasyland, journalists
How many
have to
times
try
can I say
to help them see
Fantasyland?
the reality. Joining me now is Dan Rather, former anchor
Oh, here comes Dan Rather.
of the CBS Evening News. He currently anchors the News with Dan Rather on the Young Turks streaming network. And in Washington,
God, I nearly spat out my wine. Dan Rather, now take a note here. Dan Rather is on the Young Turks, ladies and
this
gentlemen.
weekend, Sarah Westwood, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and Doug Heye, a CNN political commentator and former RNC communications director. Doug, let me start with you. Sometimes when I try to point out these misquotes, these misattributions, this sloppiness, this misleading rhetoric, I get a lot of people to respond to me on social media.
Ladies and gentlemen, the aged Dan Rather hosting the Young Turks. Yeah, he's so hip.
And say, Brian, we know you don't need to tell us at this point. Is there any value anymore, Doug, in trying to point out the daily deflections and spin?
Oh.
You know, there's so much noise these days.
I love a four-person. Look at Brian. Look at him. He's so eager. He's so excited. Brian asks the best leading questions in the media. Like, you guys all know what a loaded question is, what a leading question is, right? So I don't have to explain that. Brian Stelter asks the absolute best leading questions. He's like, Doug, is there any point even discussing this anymore? It's like, well, you just asked me to.
That it's hard to filter things through. I think it's important to point out where things are right and wrong. And let me say in full disclosure, since you showed
Denise correctly points out Dan Rather left the media in disgrace. Yes, because he made up memos. Do you remember? What a better guy to get on to talk about memos. Remember? Dan Rather made up news. That's why he got the sack from CNN. That's why he was picked up by the Young Turks. Here at the Young Turks, if the news ain't good, we'll make it good. Oh, thank you, Cenk. Now, let's bring out Dan Rather. He epitomizes our brand.
Jeanine Pirro interview earlier. I had been invited on that show several times before I joined CNN, and I'm really proud to say that I said no every time, and not just because it was on a Saturday night. This show and other shows on Fox and other shows on other networks, I think take their rhetoric to the extreme.
I was asked to go on Jeanine Pirro's show a lot, and I always said no, and it's like, bravo. Congratulations. That's what it takes. Those are the kinds of standards we need here at Reliable Sources. People who aren't willing to go on shows that they disagree with. That's what we want right here on Reliable Sources. We want people who refuse to talk to people who disagree with them. Thank you, Doug.
I think there's no better example of that than Jeanine Pirro's show, is why I'm proud that I always said no to their show. But look, yeah, of course, it's important to hold any politician accountable. I will say, though, as a conservative, there are a lot of us who feel that all the fact checkers who have set themselves up to be essentially independent arbiters of truth have their own biases that need to be brought out. And that's why you see so many negative reactions from not just Republicans on Capitol Hill, but folks at CPAC and conservatives in the media as well. Fact checking is.
Speaking of fact checking, Doug, didn't we just go through this whole thing at the start of this clip? Remember the start? Jeanine Pirro, she quoted some ridiculous poll from
50%
CPAC.
At CPAC, you're at 93% approval rating.
And Brian Stelter goes on to tell us, of course most of the people agree with Donald Trump at CPAC. What a ridiculous poll to put up. And I mentioned 2 weeks ago, Brian Stelter was saying that half of the Republicans hate Donald Trump. So of course, why wouldn't they hate him? He's tearing the party apart. So, that was 2 weeks ago. Then today, it's 93% at CPAC. Of course, most of the people at CPAC agree with Donald Trump. And then this joker, comes on and he does the exact meme we were just bloody discussing. Listen to this.
Media as well. Fact checking is important. Independent arbiters of truth have their own biases that need to be brought out. And that's why you see so many negative reactions from not just Republicans on Capitol Hill, but folks at CPAC. And
so many negative reactions. What, all 6% of them? This is a circus. This is an absolute circus. Now he's fact checking, exactly. He is literally doing the exact opposite of what Stelter said in the beginning, which is the exact opposite of what I said they normally do. God. I don't even know pretzel twisters that could get themselves into this much of a knot and still be tasty. It is an absolute circus. One more time from Doug Hay, who only goes on Reliable Sources because, this is a real show.
Have their own biases that need to be brought out. And that's why you see so many negative reactions from not just Republicans on Capitol Hill, but folks at CPAC and conservatives in the media as well. Fact checking is important, but we need to make sure that it's done on an even-handed level. Trump creates some of the biases against him on his own, which is its own problem.
Sarah, what's your impression? You were at CPAC for a few days. You heard President Trump up there on stage. He was giving really a campaign-style stump speech. Is this what he prefers to be doing, trying to go back to what worked so well for him during the campaign?
I think we've seen that more and more, whether it's calling into a...
Sarah Westwood, please. You work for the Washington Examiner. You're young. You're presentable. Get off CNN right now. You need to run. You need to get away from Brian Stelter as soon as possible, darling. This is not doing your career any favors.
Fox show, which was a tactic that he deployed very frequently during the campaign to allow him to sort of blitz all media coverage to these more freewheeling speeches, which is obviously his preference rather than giving the structured kind of remarks that are required of a president. President Trump really feeds off the energy of crowds. So the CPAC crowd was very friendly. I think that his speech sort of went off the...
See, well, now we're back to the first point again. She says the CPAC crowd was very friendly. The guy just before her said, obviously, all of the negative reactions at CPAC. Brian Stelter said, of course, all the CPAC people love Donald Trump, when 2 weeks ago he was saying, of course, half the Republicans hate him. Everything, I think I figured out, CNN, everything is an undisputable, inherent, truthful fact at the point that it's said. So when the quote hits oxygen, when the quote hits oxygen, it's fact, and it's just as soon as it becomes fact, it also becomes false, like that. It's a fact for the moment in time, in the space-time continuum that it exists only. And then it melts away and it's gone, it's forgotten, we can forget about it completely. It is only a fact for the moment that it's hit your eardrums, and then after that we can just make up new ones. There you go, we figured it out. We're talking about facts on a increasingly diminishing timeline of relevance. Okay? That's how we do facts here on Reliable Sources.
Rails at certain points because he was sort of interacting with the audience at one point. I'm sure you noticed he inexplicably asked the audience to clap for whether they preferred tax cuts to the Second Amendment. It's something that doesn't totally make a lot of sense intellectually, but he was loving the fact that the crowd was loving him, and I think that amped him up a lot.
Dan Rather, as someone who has been covering presidents for decades,
Dan's in the studio.
Have you seen this kind of Fantasyland thinking or behavior before?
Fantasyland thinking.
We've certainly seen behavior we didn't like in presidents, but we've never seen anything like this. This is new, and I do think that most people get it, that most people understand that they're facing on a daily basis from the White House and from the president himself the rough equivalent. You're facing a fertilizer spreader in a windstorm, and it's
just want to take a moment to appreciate the banner there. Reliable Sources, President Trump's Fantasyland, Dan Rather, anchor for the Young Turks Network. He's not young, he's not Turkish. This is the Fantasyland, and this guy ain't reliable. So let's just, that's a full house, bang. Push over the chips to me. There is your four aces, bang. Four of a kind. You're out of there. Let's go all in on the young Turkish man, Dan Rather, who is a reliable source talking about Donald Trump's Fantasyland.
That's the point of shock with the president, that Donald Trump, in his mind, you can argue he's delusional. He thinks he's triumphant. You say, well, he's 35% approval ratings. How can he think that? I have no explanation for it, but that's what
Ernie Banks said he had some strokes. Yes, and it does take different strokes to move the world. Yes, it does.
He does have some things going for him, the economy being for one thing. But this business on guns and the shooting in Parkland, I think has damaged his standing. I think one reason you're seeing a drop in the polls for 35%. But I will say this, Brian, if you want to judge where President Trump, whether
there was never any mass shooting before President Trump, and all mass shootings here on in all have to do with President Trump. That's why you've seen a drop in the polls.
He's really in deep trouble.
Deep trouble.
The mark is 30%. If his approval rating gets 30% or below, this is Richard Nixon country during Watergate, 30% or above, he can probably keep himself going and hold out some hope of keeping the House and the Senate in
and
November.
He's been between 30 and 40. CNN had him at 40% last month, now back to 35. Gallup has him at 37.
See how he says CNN had him at 30%. He doesn't say we had him at 30%. No. Got to create that one arm's length of distance between you and you doing your own poll, which you then put out as fact, and then literally say that everyone else's polls are irrelevant because they don't meet our standards for polling, like you did in the beginning of the clip. So, no. CNN have had him at such and such, and that's a factual poll. Those other polls that don't meet our standards, they're a different story altogether. Right? CNN had him. Big CNN watermark there at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen.
Right now, he's been in this same range for a while, but you say we're beyond shock at this point. Do you think there's less use then in journalists trying to check the false claims?
Not only I think it's useful, I think it's absolutely imperative now more than ever is when the press needs to be a kind of truth squad for this and every other president. It's perhaps more important with President Trump because there are more untruths to set the record straight. But if journalists cower, as many in Congress, both some Republicans and some Democrats in Congress are cowering with the NRA, if journalists cower, then how long can we sing "We're the Home of the Brave"?
Last question in this block goes to Doug High, because Doug...
If journalists cower, how long can we sing "Home of the Brave"? Says the guy who works for the Young Turks.
You were a former RNC communications director. I know you've thought about this issue of guns for...
Now, if you go to thecommondiscourse.com, click on TCD videos, we did a whole video about communications directors on reliable sources. That was last week's weekly Stelter. It was 2 communications directors in there playing rhetorical ping pong with the audience. Now, for those who aren't aware, communications directors are essentially glorified PR reps. It is literally their job to spin information. So here we are now on reliable sources citing communications directors. Again. The fun never ends.
A long time. How much activism do you see in the coverage in the wake of Parkland, and how much do you think journalists are overstepping their bounds?
Honestly, I see a ton of it. I think there are changes that could and should be made, but I see a ton of it on every day. And I'll tell you, if you talk to Republicans outside of Washington, D.C. on the issue of guns, abortion, gay marriage, climate change, they see an activist press that basically issues the talking points of the left every day. I was at a farm 2 weeks ago in Fletcher, North Carolina, a friend's farm of mine, where there was a big cookout. And what I heard so often was talking about the press was that the press essentially does act as the...
Everything's up. Everything's getting...
Hang on. That was a mistake. Where are we? Where were we? Sorry about that.
On every day, and I'll tell you, if you talk to Republicans outside of Washington, D.C. on the issue of guns, abortion, gay marriage, climate change, they see an activist press that basically issues the talking points of the left every day. I was at a farm 2 weeks ago.
Colleen says, I've never watched this. I'm shocked by the blatant propaganda. Peeps, watch. Yes, no, you should watch it. You should watch it. You should always try to seek out the stuff that you disagree with the most and watch as much of it as possible. For maybe 2 reasons. One, it might, give you an even more solid standing on why you disagree. Or 2, you might hear something that you disagree with but makes sense, and maybe it changes your thinking. That might not happen very often on reliable sources, but you never know. We live in hope. So yeah.
Go in Fletcher, North Carolina, a friend's farm of mine, where
he was. I'm calling bullshit. I don't think I would ever I don't think anybody has invited Doug Hayer to a cookout. Never. I do not want this guy at a cookout. Do you? He'd probably be the kind of guy who brings like a bag of Cheetos or something as well. Doesn't bring any beer, but always has a beer in his hand. You know those guys? Comes to a cookout, doesn't bring beer, always seems to be holding a beer. Where'd you get that beer from, bro? Oh, yeah, I bought some. Did you? Yeah. What are you drinking there, Bud Light? Yeah. I bought Bud Light too. Did you? Yeah. I'm sure, I'm sure they're in the same fridge. I put them in the same fridge as yours. Oh, okay. Okay. Farmer Doug.
Every day. I was at a farm 2 weeks ago in Fletcher, North Carolina, a friend's farm of mine,
Fletcher, North
where there was a
Carolina.
big cookout. And what I heard so often was, talking about the press, was that the press essentially does act as the left. And so it's one thing to have conversations in New York and in Washington, D.C., but what people outside of the country see and hear every day is a press that they feel is against them, at least if you're talking to Republican voters. Yep. That not only echoes what Trump says, it means that they're listening to what Trump says, whether on the Jeanine Pirro show or other shows, and essentially taking marching orders from them. It's a very serious thing, and it's also why I think it's
How dare they listen to what Donald Trump says, these Republican voters? They should be ashamed of themselves, says the Republican communications director. Yeah, he's obviously a star in the world of communications directing, which is why he's on reliable sources right now instead of working in the White House. He's not working in the White House, is he? No. Oh, no, ladies and gentlemen. He's on Brian Stelter's show going to cookouts in North Carolina. He says a lot of the Republican voters, they believe what Trump says. That's a problem. I mean, he's a fucking superstar at communications directing, this joker. Donald Trump's communications director team has basically made all of his supporters back up what he says. That's a problem. God. You can only get this guy on reliable sources, ladies and gents. You can only get him on reliable sources. That was
The Weekly Stelter.
good times.